And really excited about this session we're going to have here. And I guess I shouldn't be blocking everyone, but we have Dr. Kevin Sabet, who is the author of this book that we are very joyously celebrating today. Its launch just a couple days ago, One Nation Under the Influence. It's a groundbreaking book. I'm going to let him do all the talking. But the one ask we have for you this evening, in addition to you just lending your ears and listening and learning probably some things you haven't heard before and a lot of interesting experiences that he gathered in this book, is we would ask you to please give a contribution of $25 per book, if you don't mind. It's probably the cheapest night in New York City as it relates to anything else you could be doing around the city, in my opinion. So Dr. Kevin Sabet, and we also have Paul Samuels here with us. He's the CEO of the Legal Action Center. For 4 decades, he has been giving his life in service, using his skills and his talents to help these critically underserved communities like those with substance use disorders, HIV, and others. So we're very thankful, Paul, for you lending your voice to this evening as well. That being said, the final thing I will say is we've had an amazing day of events. Some of you have joined us on these events, and it's been exciting to see the momentum behind a message for some sanity when it comes to drug policy. A message saying that, you know what, we've gone way too far letting industry dictate what is going to happen in this city and in this country when it comes to drug policy. It's time to actually listen to the science, to the research, and to really notice that all around us, there are experiments at the state level. There are experiments even in other countries that are having tremendous impact on solving the scourge of addiction and substance use. Things that are working that we can bring here, we can scale up, and I'm so excited about the results that we could see with the momentum we're seeing across the country. So thank you to those of us who joined us earlier in the city for the launch of our impact report, the advertising campaign that we're launching to educate people on marijuana. And tonight you're going to hear about not just marijuana, but moving on from there to all the other stuff we're learning with all of their drug policy. Final, very honorable mention, we have some VIPs here in the crowd, many VIPs, but specifically we have some amazing family members here. Dr. Sabet, his parents, and a number of other family are here. So let's just give them a warm round of applause. It's a family here, and as the executive vice president, having worked here 8 years with Sabet, it's been fun to be a part of that family in many different ways. So that being said, Paul, I'm going to turn over to you.
Okay. I think I'm mic'd up, so might not need to.
Yeah.
Might not need any.
Yeah, you might.
It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here with Kevin, an old friend. He's young, but we've known each other a long time, and really an honor, given all that you've accomplished, to be asked to do a little moderating here and throw some questions at you. So I'll do a quick intro on a couple things, throw some questions at Kevin, and then we'll invite questions and discussion from all of you. So I think everybody here knows that Kevin is a leading thought leader on drug policy in the country and globally. He served in the Office of National Drug Control Policy under both Democratic administrations and Republican, Obama, Clinton, and Bush. He firmly believes that drug policy is not a partisan issue, which it isn't. He's an assistant adjunct professor at Yale Medical School, a fellow at Yale's Institution for Social and Policy Studies, and a columnist at Newsweek, and rarely sleeps. Together with another of my old friends, Patrick Kennedy, he founded Smart Approaches to Marijuana and is also the founder of the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. There's the new book. I already bought it ahead of time, read it. It's terrific, so you all have to buy it. And it makes, holidays are coming up. Great Christmas gift, Hanukkah gift. I wasn't paid for this, by the way. So it's an unpaid advertisement. And Kevin, your book really comes at a critical moment when we've seen 1 million drug deaths in the past 25 years. Overdose deaths at one point, a couple of years ago, over 100,000 in 1 year. A shifting drug landscape moving from farm-grown products to powerful synthetics that are killing so many people. We have sharp anti-drug rhetoric coming out of the White House, but also seeing government programs that fund treatment being slashed and effective harm reduction services defunded. 40 states have legalized marijuana for medical or recreational purposes. So the stakes are high. We need thoughtful leadership and bipartisan action. Thank you for your lifelong dedication to drug policy and for writing this book. Okay, so first question. Your first 3 books, terrific books about marijuana. And as we just mentioned, this book is much broader than that. Why?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here, and I want to thank all the incredible people that are here. Many of whom are actually in the book, and I don't know if they've even seen where they are in the book, and I hope they'll be happy with the way I characterized their work. But you're doing incredible work, saving lives here. We could talk. I would like to actually talk mostly about the people in the audience because they're doing everything from prevention to narcotics prosecution, getting people to treatment through the criminal justice system, to community work in Harlem for so many years on this issue. So you all are doing so much work, and I'm honored to be here, and of course to be in your presence, Paul, and have you agree to moderate this is really an honor and privilege. And Patrick says hello and was so happy. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but he was very happy to hear that we were doing this together. So why move beyond marijuana is the question. Well, I think one of the impetuses for this book is by sort of accident, I talk a little bit about the details about why I found myself in arguably the most beautiful city in North America by accident, but also, interestingly, the city with the highest number of drug overdose deaths per capita in the world, or at least in the Western Hemisphere. And that's a place called Vancouver, British Columbia, and a beautiful place where we're raising our daughter and we're very happy at, but also a place that has really grappled with this issue for a long time, given where it is, as a port city, its geographic location and proximity to Asia, on the border, the U.S. northern border, has long struggled with drugs, but recently with this fentanyl crisis really has seen it even in a more acute way. And I found myself there and looking at kind of folks doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And the same thing being, not funding prevention and treatment with the ways that we should, but also allowing for, public drug use and selling, not really dealing with that at all. And taking a very good concept, you referred to harm reduction, and something that can be implemented in many successful ways, but maybe taking it to the extreme and to really, it wasn't even resembling harm reduction anymore, even though that was the original thing. So things like giving synthetic opioid pills to people who are addicted to fentanyl, thinking that they would use those regulated substances and at least not die from street fentanyl made in China. But in reality, what was happening when we sort of started to dig was that people were selling those pills to actually get fentanyl. They wanted fentanyl. That was the nature of the drug epidemic there. And then sort of zooming out and looking what we're doing in the US, as you said, 1 million people in the last 25 years. If you think about that, think about 1 million people, how many family members that has affected. And we know that for everybody who dies of an overdose today, 10 more people overdosed but didn't die today. And of those, more than 50% are maybe permanently disabled. So this goes even beyond just the drug death numbers, which are so horrific. And it was, I think it's easy, as in Vancouver, I think this was happening, to become hopeless because you sort of become numb to the numbers. I mean, if you think about what 1 million people, what that means, 100,000, it means a 737 airplane crash every single day for a year. Now, if we had 5 737 crashes in a month, the country would be transformed. I think we would see bipartisan solutions. We would have to come together. We would figure it out. And for some reason with this issue, and there are many reasons, I think, which I won't go into now, we have decided not to want to figure it out. And so we're left with this huge problem. And so it's easy to become very hopeless. And it's easy to think that nothing works. It's easy to think we've had sort of failed policies that have got us into this situation. And so, maybe we should try something like legalizing drugs. And so marijuana, going back to your question, was the first drug that, in Canada and also here, we're legalizing. But the solutions are we're now being told we should go beyond marijuana. Let's legalize other drugs, and maybe we'll make it out that way. Or maybe we should try things like, again, prescribing drugs to current users, thinking they'll use that as some sort of new solution. And the book talks about how solutions like that are not only not good solutions, they've actually been tried before. We did that 100 years ago in the U.S. Britain did it 70 years ago. They gave heroin to people on a regular basis who were using it, and it did not end well. We also did a version of that about 100 years ago. It did not end well. So I think people forget about that, but they also forget that we do have things that can work. And that's kind of the goal with the book, was to talk about how there are amazing people, some in this room, doing incredible work around the country, that if we only brought that work to scale, funded it the way we should, we would actually see a change. And because I think we can think it's completely intractable, and we think that we have to invent some new technology, or it's like as hard as this, the idea of going to Jupiter, like something is just we cannot even wrap our head around. But I argue in the book that actually the solutions are right in front of us, and we know what to do. It's a matter of wanting to do it.
Well, getting to that, it'd be great to get a little bit into what you're thinking solutions should be.
Yeah.
And just to tee that up, I mean, as you well know, one of the mistakes that we've made in our country for a long time is trying to play whack-a-mole with one drug after another, the drug du jour.
Right.
First it's this drug, then it's that drug. When in fact, as we know, substance use disorder, addiction is a disease, is an illness that is a holistic one. So how does that factor in to how you think about we could be doing things better?
Yeah, I mean, and I struggle with that too, because we know that like you said, the vast majority of people who are using, they're not just using one drug. It's a poly-substance use issue. It's multiple drugs. It's mental. It's co-occurring disorders, mental illness. It's also, the risk factor of poverty is as important as the risk factor of extreme wealth and time for young people in terms of using. So it's very faceted, and it's interesting because I have focused a lot of my recent career, at least, on the marijuana issue as a single drug, because of this sort of massive commercialization push in a way that we haven't seen since big tobacco, where you have multi-billion-dollar multinational companies whose business it is to sell it and have lifelong customers and addict people. That's the business. And so we sort of have focused on that, but when you zoom out, you actually see that these issues can apply to all of the drugs, and that when you talk about addiction as a disease, you're not really talking about one drug, because, the vast majority of people who are, might be killed by a fentanyl pill or some kind of fentanyl in their drug, they have a history of multiple drug use. It's not just fentanyl. I mean, today it was fentanyl, but yesterday it was something else, and it all contributed to where they are now. And so it is important to focus on, I think, policy as a whole, and also how does mental health come in? How does housing policy? How does healthcare policy? How does education? How do all of those things, law enforcement and criminal justice, how do all of those things fit in? I think are important questions to ask.
Yeah, picking up on your thread about you living in Vancouver and what's gone on there, I mean, I think probably across the spectrum in our field, there's a widespread reaction to what Oregon tried to do with their. I think all of us would consider, kind of no matter where perspective you come from, that it was a failed attempt at decriminalization. One of the biggest problems being that the laws were changed, but money didn't come forward, services weren't there. Oregon already was one of the least well-financed drug treatment substance use systems, least progressive in terms of care. Are there ways that you see that we could move more from the criminal justice model away, but in more effective ways than that?
Yeah. So Oregon is interesting. I have a whole chapter on Oregon, and what's interesting about Oregon is it was, in the midst.
Made me ask the question.
Yeah, exactly. And so I thought so. What's interesting about it is, during 2020 pandemic, Black Lives Matter, sort of defund police movement, there was a move by sort of the national drug legalization lobby, I'll call them, which is a sort of uneasy mix of libertarians and business people and, some well-intentioned people who have seen rightfully how that we've over-relied on the criminal justice system as well, kind of come together and say, listen, we want to do what Portugal did. And I went to Portugal as well for the book. And they said, what Portugal did is they decriminalized drugs, and so we should do this. And we're going to pick Oregon because politically we'll probably get it passed, especially in 2020, and it's a great place to start. That's what they thought, even though, like you said, it was like the worstly funded treatment and everything else, the worst place to start. But politically, it was the best place to start. So that's what's important. It's a political campaign for a lot of these folks. So they went there, and a large majority of people said, yeah, I want to treat this as an illness. I want to treat addiction as a disease, get people treatment, and as opposed to jail. And that sounds good. I think that sounds good to probably everyone in this room, by the way. The reality was, I think the devil was in the details, and the fact was that what actually passed was very different than what people thought they were voting on. And so 2 years later, compared to neighbors like Washington State or compared to the national average for sure, Oregon's drug deaths were skyrocketing. And people say, well, how is this happening? Because we thought we voted for treatment. And what they voted for was actually a hands-off approach. So this is where harm reduction has become, from a well-intentioned, strategy that should be used in particular circumstances, to really being taken over by a much more libertarian, I would say, sort of line of thought, which is kind of let people just do whatever they want, whenever they want. And that's what happened in Oregon. And they said that, we're not really legalizing it, because if you do get caught with drugs in public, we're going to give you a $100 fine, or you can call a phone number to get help. And so I thought to myself, this phone number, I want to go to the phone center of where this is in Portland. And it happened to be run by one of our good friends. He was the U.S. attorney under President Obama, Dwight Holton. And I called Dwight and I said, I want to come visit. So I went to the call center, and it was, I wrote it in the book, like it was Ghostbusters, like, who are you going to call? Because nobody was calling and nobody was answering. And I said, well, you're getting some money for this, right? He's like, we're getting a little bit of money. We're getting the money that was promised from the marijuana revenue was going to fund this phone center. And so they're not making much marijuana revenue. So that's one of the reasons that the phone center is pretty dead. But also it's because nobody's calling. And nobody's calling because there's no incentive to call. And that made me think about, well, this disease is such that denial is a huge factor. And so it's a lot of times hard to convince people that they even have a problem. And we know that 80% of people who have a substance use disorder, have an addiction, don't believe that they do. And then that made me think, well, we actually need to figure out ways to get them to understand that they have a problem and they need help, as opposed to only saying, it's completely up to you. Your brain has been hijacked by the substance. You let us know when you're ready. And Oregon tried to do that, and it completely failed. And we met with the mayor there. Obviously, progressive mayor of Portland. This is not some neoconservative mayor of Portland or anything. In Portland, Oregon, who just was so beside himself. Ted Wheeler could just put his hands up and said, "We have just been, this has been put in our lap. We have a disaster of of the first order in public because of all the public drug dealing and the public drug use that was happening." And so we went from sort of this idea of relying on the criminal justice system only to saying, let's get the criminal justice system out of it entirely. And I think that's as much of a mistake as only relying on the criminal justice system. And I think one of the things, one of the things that that Oregon has taught us is that there is this false dichotomy between criminal justice and public health, that these two systems actually can work well together if we do it the right way. Because, as people would say, 70% of those in the criminal system have a drug problem, and they're not there for drugs, they're there for other crimes. So that's a perfect place to actually get treatment, get help, and do it the right way. We haven't figured out how to do that. And so we resort to things like Oregon, and we create the problem, make it worse.
All right. I think a lot of us are probably paying attention to things that are happening in Washington these days.
Yeah.
I assume you are too. And in fact, I know you recall when we first met, I think you were an intern at ONDCP, weren't you?
Early on, yeah.
That's pretty early, yeah.
Yeah.
That's when we first met and started working together. So you have a huge amount of perspective, historical and otherwise, on the federal government. And maybe first starting with ONDCP, and then I'll expand out a little bit. But I mean, as you know, for a while, most notably under President Clinton, the drug czar's office, the president, the director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy was cabinet level. It had a lot of influence, and since then it's been taken below cabinet level. Not so much. The question is not so much about the intricacies of that, inside baseball, but more about what's your view of the lack of strong drug leadership in that way within an administration, and what the ups and downs of that are.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, one of the things that I was able to do in this book was interview almost every living director, not just director of that office, but before that office. So under Reagan, it was something else. Under Carter, it was something else. Ford, and then we were able to go back to Nixon. And in fact, really, so basically from Nixon's time. And, it was very clear whether you're talking to someone very conservative or very liberal who served each president, and they were all different. that the lack of leadership just that we've seen, and it's not just one party or the other, it's been both for, a while now, 15, 20 years, that has had a negative impact because Congress wanted an idea of somebody to organize that. The drug problem touches on so many different facets of society. I mean, it's the Department of Agriculture, it's the military, it's the Health and Human Services, it's housing, it's all this. So to have a central, one person to kind of coordinate that in one office, I think was very important. Now, and it's been like this for a while, it's been sort of cast aside. And I think that's probably unfortunate. Now, maybe that would be okay if we saw, some alternative that was maybe better that we haven't thought of, that someone smarter than us thought of, and that would be fine. But I haven't seen that. And so I think the lack of that leadership, and this is something that, again, every drug czar that I interviewed for this, or every director, I should say, that I interviewed for this, agreed, no matter what their politics were, that it was really too bad that we haven't seen that at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you had the job.
Mm.
And with this president, was the one there, or subsequent presidents, if you had the job, what would be the one or two priorities of all the things that we could do that you would see as most important and potentially have the best chance of really making a huge amount of progress?
Well, I think, first of all, as the richest country in the world, the fact that we have people who want to get help and can't get help, it's hard enough to want to get help. That's already a huge, as I was talking about earlier with addiction, it's a kind of chemical slavery disease that, why would you want to get help? It feels great. You're doing drugs because it feels good. You're not doing drugs because it feels bad. And so you're trying to convince someone of something that feels good that is actually not maybe very good for you. And that is very difficult to do in this country. We don't have a good track record of, people don't like to be told what to do. And that's why this country was created, because we didn't like to have people tell us what to do. So that's a really difficult sell. And so thinking about, first of all, we need a national treatment system that actually is connected with real standards. We need real treatment for people. The treatment system there's no system. It's a broken montage of different, collage of different things that don't really work. And if you're rich enough or lucky enough to live in a community or run into a place where there's good treatment, that's great. And there are some great, I'm not saying there aren't great places to get help here. There are, but that's far too out of reach. And we need to promote this idea of recovery. So I would want to promote not only a new national treatment system, but recovery, because addiction is the only disease where you're a better person after you had it than before you had it. If you think about any other disease, you can't really say that. You're not usually necessarily a better person after you have cancer than, you'd have been equally as good before you had cancer. But with addiction, it's different. And the 30, 40 million people living in recovery today in this country prove that recovery is a real thing that we should be promoting. I would also do a lot more on the prevention side as well, where we don't really have any uniform drug prevention. It's completely there are no standards. It's fly-by-night operations. Parents have no idea what to do. We have to start with parents on that. And then the other thing I would do is figure out how to merge better the criminal justice system and the public health system, because that's a tremendous opportunity to get people help. And the reason is because addiction hijacks the brain. It's a different kind of disease than, say, something like multiple sclerosis, where you can't really, for lack of a better term, bribe somebody with MS to get better. But with folks that have substance use disorders and have addictions, I'm not saying you can bribe them to get better, but you can give them incentives, and they work even with people that are severely addicted. So this judge, our good friend Judge Alm in Hawaii, who is now the leading prosecuting attorney there, when he was judge, he was just sick of seeing the same people in and out of the system, in and out, in and out, in and out. They'd go to prison for a month or two, they'd come out, reoffend, come out, and he said, "What if we actually only gave them 2 or 3 days in prison?" But we gave them the chance to go to drug treatment or to show that they're not using drugs. Because not everybody also needs treatment to stop using drugs. Some people need, their girlfriend or significant other to say, "I'm going to kick you out of the house unless you stop drinking." I mean, that's how George Bush stopped drinking. He didn't stop drinking by going to some fancy treatment center, and they could have afforded it. President Bush stopped drinking because his young wife at the time said, it's Jim Beam or me. And that was enough for him. Now, that's not enough for everybody, and it's all different. But for a lot of people, the kind of convincing is something that is very, very important. And so when you have a judge say, you have a choice, you can go to treatment, you can stop using another way, we'll drug test you, or you're going to go to jail for 2 or 3 days. That sounds like something very simple, but it was revolutionary. And he was told, you're going to increase the prison population, Judge. Why are you doing this? These people can't stop. They're just going to use, this incentive won't work. And you're now going to swell the prison. If you actually follow through with doing this, you're going to, and he said, no, I think it'll work. And it did, because the vast majority of people, these were hardcore methamphetamine primarily users in Hawaii. Methamphetamine is the issue there, not fentanyl. And so they had remarkable results, and people were not coming in and out of the system anymore. And actually, people were not even jailed for the 2 days. A real kind of incentive where you also listened to the person, you saw what their needs were. It was less adversarial, more cooperative with the defense attorney and prosecutors. It actually worked very well. And we have other versions of that, like drug treatment courts. They're great, but they're also still very boutique-y, and they're sort of the thing that the cool or eccentric judge in the county one volunteers to do because they're an interesting person, as opposed to it being enshrined in law. Automatically, if you have a drug problem, this is the route that you go. And it doesn't take that many resources. That's the thing. These things are cheap. I mean, prevention especially is very cheap. I mean, even ineffective prevention is somewhat ineffective is better than none because it's just so cheap. And these things are much less expensive than imprisoning somebody with a mandatory minimum for 20 years, than doing a lot of the other things that we've tried to do, sometimes with good, sometimes with bad intentions. But it's common sense, but it just needs to be scaled up.
I got one more question, and then we're going to
Sure.
go to all of your questions. Another one ripped from the headlines. So our military is bombing drug boats off the coast of Venezuela.
Yeah.
We're threatening to invade Mexico and/or Venezuela to go after cartels and major drug dealers. Of course, we all hate cartels and major drug dealers. But how would you advise policymakers on how to best address the supply issue? Are these approaches you would support? And if not, what else would you think we should be doing?
That's a tough question because it is complicated. I mean, this is obviously a global issue. The issue of fentanyl in this country is both domestic and foreign. It's Chinese crypto working with Mexican criminal organizations, conspiring with the Russian mafia, working with through the Balkans, working with the Dutch mafia. I mean, it is so incredibly complex. And we have generally, I would say, for the last 5 years or so, been very afraid to approach other countries about a lot of these issues because it's sort of hypocritical. We're the biggest drug using nation in the world. So we're the one fueling, right, the demand. We're the demand. So you could argue if we weren't so hungry for drugs and we weren't one nation under the influence, there wouldn't be an incentive to do that supply, and that would be gone. That's, I think, somewhat true, but it's also a little bit simplistic because, first of all, these drug networks are involved with way more than drugs. Their number one thing is human trafficking, much more than even as much money as they're making from something like cocaine, which costs nothing to produce, zero, costs less than a cent to produce a dose, and it sells for 100 times that. They're still, it's not as much money as making for human trafficking. Colombian cartels are making most of their money from legal mining and logging that they're exploiting. So it's a very complex issue. And what I would say is we have worked with countries before to make the problem smaller. So we had Plan Colombia under President Clinton and General McCaffrey, which was a difficult but important program where we, did alternative farming. What else can you grow other than cocoa? Or also in Afghanistan, what else could you grow other than opium that might be, that we can sort of make more lucrative for you? It's very difficult. And in Colombia, that actually worked for a while. The problem was we did not have the ongoing cooperation because politically these countries change all the time, including ours. And so this is not something that can be solved in 4 years, 8 years, and 6-year term in Mexico, 3-year term in Colombia. And that's the political reality is very, very difficult. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think we should indiscriminately bomb small boats that are probably mules that don't even have very little to do with the folks that are up high, because they're not sending up, senior managers of Colombia, of the Venezuelan cartels on these boats to be open season for the American military. But I do think I was somewhat surprised that something that President Trump did seem to have had some kind of effect, more than we've seen. I don't know if it's long term, but for example, even just the threats, some of the threats to Mexico that were made when President Sheinbaum in Mexico started about fentanyl, she very wisely said, well, let's figure out how to work together. And we agree. And they started arresting folks that our DEA we have been trying to arrest for over 30 years. I mean, they found the person who killed the man who inspired Red Ribbon Week in 1986. They've been looking for him since 1986. And in about a day, the Mexican government turned that person over. That also tells me that governments, including ours, but foreign governments, they do know a lot of these players. They have a lot of intelligence on what's going on, and it's not really in their interest to share that with the U.S. And I don't know the answer to how to make that into their interests, but we know, and this is recently proven in Mexico with what's been going on with the arrests, especially like in the last 6 months ago, that these governments do know how to deal with it a little bit. It's not like they are completely, because before they just say, well, we're doing our best. And then you find out 10 years later that the general in Mexico was actually the head of one of the cartels. And that makes sense because it's so ingrained in government, and it's so much about the political, it's so ingrained in the political institution. So I'm not giving you a straight answer because it's extremely complex. I do think supply reduction and interdiction can work. I'm not one of those people that think we should completely abandon it, because if we do it here and we get them over here, it's just going to pop up over there. Actually, we've seen that there are ways to work with other countries in a cooperative way, but it's extremely difficult. So diplomacy obviously is going to be chiefly important. But it's hard, really hard.
Yes. Any of you would like to raise any questions? Yes.
We have a mic here for the.
Yes. There's a mental health crisis going on in the United States, starting at younger and younger ages. And it's just my personal opinion here that when a child gets an iPhone at the age of 10, we should start teaching them about addiction and start preventing it right then. What's your thoughts on how young we should attack that crisis?
The crisis of.
Well, first of all, there's a crisis with the iPhone,
right,
creating mental health issues. And often, for my son's 10th birthday, he's 22 now, and he's in his 5th year of a substance use program, right? Started with weed, everything that we talked about this afternoon, but he started getting, mental health issues around 15 years of age. And a lot of it came through his iPhone comparison with other people. So my question is, mental health is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And it's happening at younger and younger ages. When should we start teaching them about addiction, our children about addiction?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, we definitely need a course correction on these new technologies. There's no doubt. And I'm not Jonathan Haidt. He actually was maybe going to come, but he couldn't make it. He wrote a great book, The Anxious Generation, about phones and social media and the impact that's having. And I agree with most of it, because, we have but it goes back to addiction for profit. It goes back to, whether addiction for profit is, Philip Morris, Altria tobacco, whether it's alcohol, spirits, whether it's Meta and social media, or whether it's other drugs. It goes back to that. It goes back to the fact that we seem to be very late as a country in catching up with what business and industry are trying to do to rewire our brains to have a lifelong customer, whether it's, again, social media or drugs. So, and now sports betting, right? So, and it's like, you think we would learn the lesson. I mean, tobacco should have been the lesson, right? We knew in 1929 that cigarettes caused cancer. Tobacco has been used for thousands of years. It only became deadly when we invented the modern day cigarette. I mean, we've had pipe smoking and all kinds of things. We didn't have lung cancer then, but when sort of, corporate America basically got hold of this and created this device, the cigarette, that was the beginning of the biggest public health crisis we've had in our history by far. And I worry about that. I think we need to start at younger ages. I think we need to have a complete course correction as a society when it comes to social media, technology, marijuana, vaping. I mean, all of these things we've kind of allowed to, let's experiment on everybody first, and then we'll figure it out and it should be the other way around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. Great seeing you. Perfect.
Hi, thanks. Just to add on to that, is anybody, you talked about like parents teaching their kids about addiction, but we have many doctors that don't understand about addiction and certainly about marijuana, the most misunderstood drug. Like, is anybody, I don't know how you do this, talking to medical schools or the AMA or whoever the heck is out there that impacts what's taught in medical school? But
when I was in the Obama administration, we reviewed that question, and Paul, you may have an answer to that too, where we looked at the medical school curriculum and we found that less than 15% of doctors were being educated on addiction. They didn't ask the questions. Patrick can tell the story of, someone very well known with a well-known addiction who, was barely ever asked about that when he would go to the doctor. And yet he was a public figure who had problems with it. And so, no, this has been, the problem is that addiction and addiction treatment has been treated sort of as this kind of segregated part, not really a part of medicine, because for so long we didn't see it as a medical issue. We only saw it as a moral issue. And so I think we're paying the price for that still. We are definitely advocating, our organization, the foundation, advocating for medical school curriculum reform on this completely, because we want young people to be able to talk to their parents. If you can stop a kid from using drugs or alcohol by age 21, they are unlikely ever to become addicted to any drug. And that's an incredible statistic. And then if we can also stop the progression. So if doctors are having the conversation with young people to be able to stop that, to sort of stop it before it gets worse, you're also going to have good outcomes. So yeah, it's a very important question.
Yeah,
Please.
I would strongly second exactly what you said in the question also. And I can give you one example. We have made some progress. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we and a lot of people advocated for that finally has happened is that now for doctors, in order to get their DEA registration that allows them to prescribe opioids and other medications, they have to take an online course about addiction. That's great. But what's really sad is that for a large percentage of doctors, that's the first time that they have had any training about addiction, despite that it's one of the, substance use disorder, one of the biggest health conditions in the country. And yet it's rarely taught in medical schools. There are very few fellowships and residencies, internships, which is the pipeline, in the medical community for addressing important issues. So couldn't agree more. We have a long way to go on that.
Paul, you mentioned harm reduction. Kevin, you dig into that in the book, the dichotomies of harm reduction, and obviously being in New York City, it's a new day in New York City in terms of leadership coming. New York City is the only city in America right now, that'll change soon with Rhode Island, that has an operating injection site where people are using there. And so I think these questions of harm reduction are probably at an acute point here in the city. And you get into that in the book. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you tackled those issues?
Well, so this concept we touched on a little bit of harm reduction was sort of originated in the HIV/AIDS epidemic, where obviously HIV was a death sentence. We had 1980, in the early 80s, we did not have anywhere near what we have now. We have a functional cure now, and so it was about keeping people alive who are using injection drug users alive. And so the idea was, let's, in order to get them help for now, if we, not everybody's going to be ready for treatment tomorrow. So if they're using, at least let's have them not share dirty needles and spread HIV and hepatitis C as well, and other diseases. And that was the origination of it. It was about how do you reach the very difficult to reach populations. And I think what we have seen, as I mentioned, is this kind of taken to more extremes, where we're now, saying that, let's kind of apply it to not just those that are very hard to reach, because there's a mantra in harm reduction which says meet people where they're at. In other words, not judge them, just meet them where they're at. And I agree with that, but I talk about in the book, let's meet people where they're at, but not leave them where they're at is actually what we want to do. So to not leave them where they're at, what do we need to do? Well, we need to have harm reduction to meet them where they're at, to reach those hard to reach populations. But we need to have the goal, and it may take a very long time, it may not take a long time, but depending on the person, the goal is to move them toward recovery. The goal is to move them toward that part of, of the spectrum. And what I worry about sometimes is with some of these interventions is that we've forgotten that part. We've forgotten the part of moving people to recovery. And so I visited the injection site in Harlem. I tried to actually get in. It was very difficult to do that, but I talked to the people around, and Sean Hill, who's here, who leads the Greater Harlem Coalition. Sean, thank you for coming downtown for this. They have also seen the acute neighborhood impacts of saying, well, we're going to put all the methadone, all the injection sites, all the services in one community. Well, the reality is it's not just, in fact, if anything, Harlem is probably a community that's less likely to have those problems than other communities in New York. But as part of sort of the racial injustice that we've seen, the structural injustice, we say, well, we're just going to throw everything over there. And those people won't mind. And that, I think, is very problematic when you kind of see the inequities and the things that have happened as a result. So I kind of get into that in the book. I don't have a firm conclusion there that I have some sort of answer for Harlem that we should do this, but I at least was just trying to highlight these complications, that it's not so open and shut, that, yeah, of course, we want to have an injection site because we at least want people to use drugs in a safe place around others. If they overdose, we'll give them the antidote, Narcan. All well-intentioned things, but how do we do this in a way that moves people toward recovery, that we move towards equity when it comes to neighborhood impacts? Because there are major neighborhood impacts when you do this. I've never met a realtor who said that my client wants to find an apartment right next to the injection site, right next to the thing, right? So the point is, but that doesn't mean that we also want to not have services for people. So how do we do that in a way that's equitable and, at least informed by some of the evidence? And I think sometimes harm reduction has been used, unfortunately, as more of the libertarian side, as a vehicle to expand drug use, as opposed to trying to make the problem smaller.
Obviously, one great theme of the book is complexity and interconnectedness and the difficulty of sort of clean solutions. But if you could wave a magic wand and pass one law or promulgate one federal regulation or rule, what would it be?
I think we need a national awareness campaign about the harms of all kinds of drugs, because we used to have that in some ways, but we need a modern one, updated social media, reaching kids where they're at, and parents. Parents are woefully misinformed because the marijuana and the drugs and the LSD that their friend used at, the Summer of Love, and the marijuana that was used at Woodstock, it is completely, these drugs are totally different now. The effects are completely different. Parents are really don't have those tools. So there's a lot to do, but I would probably do that. Thank you.
Hello there.
Hi, Bob.
Kevin, thank you much for not just the book, but for your decades of leadership on policy issues. From my perspective, I think one of the biggest challenges that we face, that so many of our programs, services, and funding are rooted in a fundamental lack of understanding of addiction and recovery, and are focused solely on the physical, emotional, behavioral, and legal consequences of people's addiction. What is it that we need to do to really begin to create the groundswell that's going to push policymakers in making change? And from my perspective, the thing that I've seen have the most impact are individuals and families who share their own personal stories of their own recovery, their own struggles with dealing with addiction in family, their own loss, because what that does with policymakers is that it touches their heart in a way that now their brain can hear the rest of the message. From your experience, is that a piece of what is going to take for us to really get to the point where we've got the inertia needed and necessary to make the changes you're talking about.
Well, first of all, Bob, thank you for your decades of leadership in this issue. I'm honored that you're here, and thank you for coming, Steve, as well. I mean, you said it right there. I think we have to touch the heart as much as we do. We have all the facts. I mean, we have more we know that for every dollar spent on prevention and treatment, we save $12 in social, costs. We know that, again, if you don't use before 21, you're unlikely ever to do so. We know that if you start treatment, you're likely, and you have supports around you, you can complete it and live a full life of recovery. We have all these stats. But I do agree with you that the heart moves. There was a saying that the death of 10,000 soldiers is a mere statistic. The death of one is an absolute tragedy. We need those stories. Today, we were met with a woman who I can say her name because she was featured in the New York Times 2 years ago, Kathleen Kelly, whose son Nico was second time ever vaping. Vaped super high potency marijuana and ended up, they don't know how, fell off of their balcony of their apartment in uptown and died at 17. It was the second time ever using it. And that story is going to be more compelling than there were 3 million kids last year who had to go to drug treatment for marijuana alone. That's 3 million of those near stories, almost like Nico, not quite obviously, but almost. But that story is going to be more impactful than those stats. So I totally agree with you that we need to start talking. But, for a long time, this has been an issue shrouded in shame, where we don't want to talk about it. We can't talk about it. It's similar to mental illness, similar to how we, up until maybe the 1980s, talked about things like breast cancer. We were scared to talk about it. And so we do need to start talking about it. And we need to start to be open. And we need to start hearing from the families that are greatly affected. We often only even focus on the individual. And the family, the people around the individual are so dramatically, deeply affected. So I think the more we get those stories out, we're trying to do it with our little group. And I have to say, I just want to thank, our team at SAM and the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions. I could not be more honored to work alongside them. First of all, Luke, as our executive vice president, helped write and research this book by my side for all of it. Sam, our newer but incredible, director of media. John's here, who's our chief development officer. Chrissy runs our Parent Action Network, which organizes parents across the country. And so none of this could have been done without them. By the way, not only are they incredible, one of them, Sam, also had a book out the same day I did. His is a psychological horror thriller. That's to rave reviews, by the way. You should check it out. Great little one. It's a fast read. And yet still is here and doing this. It just shows the dedication. We have an incredible team, and I'm so honored to have them be surrounded by them. But we're able, with our little team and tiny little budget, to push on these. We did this with the hemp issue. Intoxicating hemp, which we never thought that was a thing, but it became a thing after 2018 when chemists figured out how to chemically alter the structure of the hemp plant, which is normally for industrial clothing and waffles at Whole Foods or something. They changed the chemical structure and produced these highly intoxicating substances that were killing kids, sort of gas station weed, highly dangerous, dirty stuff. It was then being replicated by underground labs in Shanghai and shipped in through Mexico. I mean, this ballooned over the last 7 years in these vapes. And, we were part of a group that, actually got Congress to agree on something. And we, talk about bipartisan solutions. We had 76 votes in the Senate 2 nights ago. That was 24 Democrats voting with the Republicans on this, which we haven't seen on hardly anything. So I think that can be done. We did that with the stories, statistics too, because you need facts, but with the stories, I think these things can be done, and we have to just keep pushing, and we're going to do that.
I got to do this. And that is that, Paul, appreciate your playing moderator in this discussion. But to direct that to you, when you look at Paul and the work that the Legal Action Center has done, as you point out, for decades, what role has that played in really pushing so much of the change that we've seen really create some progress around policy issues, around legislation, advocacy for individuals, Can you talk a little bit of how
It's been an
important
incredible
it's
inspiration because when
Yeah.
Paul was starting on this, I don't want to speak for you. We as a country thought we could just completely annihilate and get rid of drugs with a lot of brute force, essentially, only. And that if you use drugs, you were a bad, dirty person. We didn't want to talk about it. We didn't want to think about it. We didn't want to see you. And I think what Paul and his also small group that has grown, but I don't think you started with a whole lot of money and a whole lot of the resources, and could have, as a Harvard undergrad and a Columbia law, it could have gone to more lucrative careers, as probably most of his law class at Columbia did. Instead, wanted to serve the dispossessed, serve those people in jails, serve those people that were suffering on the streets. And it's an incredible inspiration. He in many ways laid the groundwork for the work that we're able to do, because I think more and more people do see addiction as a disease, do see it as a health issue, as a complex social biobehavioral issue that is not something to have shame around, but is something that we can promote recovery on and that there's hope for. I think that's what Paul and his group has done.
I appreciate that. And I think, our field has been a small but mighty group of small but mighty organizations.
We don't agree on everything,
Yes,
by the
not
way, and
always.
that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we all agree on the fundamentals, on the
absolutely.
most important
Yes.
things.
Absolutely.
Back when you were starting and when I was starting, there was virtually no federal funding. There was virtually no healthcare system funding for substance use disorder. It wasn't until the Affordable Care Act that there was even any semblance of coverage in Medicaid or in health insurance. So now the risks to those big systems have a bigger risk for us, but it's really fueled a huge increase in treatment and education of the public. So I think it's been the ability of our small but mighty field to work together in coalition.
Absolutely.
That has worked.
And this is why we're doing it, right?
Yes.
This is why we're doing what we're doing. So I want to thank you all for being here. It's been an honor. And Paul, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Boy, you couldn't have staged that better.
Perfect.